Finishing touches. The toughest part of Brady in the Tampa Bay uniform is
the face mask, I'd say.
Face mask.
It's got to be real clean cut with it, just to make sure not to mess with the face. So I'm trying to keep that.
Yeah, you can't mess with the face.
Yeah, getting down to the finishing line here. So.
And once again, the color is
cream orange.
Cream orange.
We'll name it creamsicle.
Creamsicle.
We'll transfer it to creamsicle. So.
And once again, I did help RC with this. I think I sprayed just a little bit.
A little bit in the jersey.
Yeah, so that's it.
I can say you did a little bit.
What else is this used for? Is this like regular?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not really homeowner use spray paint. It's a little lower.
Have you tagged things before?
Well, I started out as a graffiti artist, so.
So you would go like the side of the building and you would put stuff?
I don't want to be incriminated by anything.
No. Hey, statute of limitations is over. Like when you see Banksy do what he does, how tough is it to pull off something like that?
You gotta know what you're doing. You gotta have a good plan.
Is it one guy, do you think?
I don't think it's one. I think it's
because some of those are pretty elaborate hoaxes that he does.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think they're pretty well thought out. So.
But there's some great thought put into it. But that's great. I appreciate you coming in and putting Tom in the creamsicle, and we say goodbye to the. And aren't you a Patriot fan?
Yeah.
Is this difficult for you?
Yeah, but changes to the right.
Okay. I just don't want you to shed a tear when you're all done with this, when you say goodbye to Tom and all those memories.
Yeah, well, we look forward to the new ones, right?
But I thought this was going to be hard because this is the change.
Yeah, technically it's like the filter that goes over it, so it transitions the different elements. Oh, we're talking about the actual door itself.
Yes.
Oh, well, it's spray paint. I think it'd be harder if we were working with brush.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I wondered how you blend that in with Lawrence Taylor there. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Arthur. He's also not going to take part in the Cowboys' virtual OTAs. Now, OTAs aren't a big deal. Brady stopped going when Giselle said, you got to come home and, be the role of father and husband here. And he did that later in his tenure in New England. But if you're Dak Prescott and you're trying to negotiate a new contract, why not put the pressure back on the Cowboys to say, get this done. I'm going to do everything I'm supposed to do as your quarterback. And I'm going to be there for the virtual OTAs. Now, OTAs, all right, you're going to work out. There's some meetings. Maybe you go over. You got a new head coach in town. And that's where Dak should be saying, I owe it to Mike McCarthy to be on board to make sure that he can do his job as well. And this is just a small thing. It may not have any impact on the season, but the optics, as we like to say, Dak is doing everything he's supposed to be doing. Come on, Jerry, get this contract. There's more value that goes with being the Cowboy quarterback than any other quarterback in the NFL. And with this comes a lot of attention, good and bad. And he just got the negative attention because somebody took a picture or say, hey, I'm at Dak's house, and that got out. Now you're not going to do the virtual OTA. Do this to have the fans on your side. You're going to be asking for $35 million. And the fans don't care how much you get paid. They just want to know you're going to be the quarterback there. We've been going through this for 18 months? Dak Prescott on and off his contract. 18 months. And the longer the Cowboys, let this play out, it seems like it costs them more. If they would have done this when I was told they were going to do that weekend of the first NFL season, they were going to have his deal locked up. But if I'm Dak Prescott, I understand I can take less, but I'm going to make a whole lot more by being the Cowboys quarterback. I mean, you want to test this, Dak, end up, some other place and you're the quarterback there and tell me, what you're making in advertising dollars, spokesman dollars. It'll be drastically different there. He's making $10 million probably off the field. Now, granted, he didn't make much, as a, third-round draft pick? But, now you have your chance to make real money, and you're not the best quarterback. You're not a top 10 quarterback. If you get 35 a year, take it and run with it. Because if you were with the Texans, it would be completely different in your value off the field. if you were with Jacksonville, if you were with Cincinnati, like all these other places, you're with the Cowboys, you're the quarterback, go in, be part of the virtual OTAs. Be the bigger man than the Cowboys. Turn it around and say to Mike McCarthy, Coach, I'm here for you. As best I can, I'm here for you. That's what he needs to do, in my opinion. Get a positive out of this. Don't go, nope, I don't have a contract. I'm not going to be there. You're going to get a contract. Do this for Mike McCarthy. I know that Dak Prescott looks around and he goes, wait, you made my offensive lineman the highest paid at their position. Amari Cooper getting $100 million. Zeke got paid here. What about me? I get it. But they're not getting $35 million a year, Dak. In NFL history, only 2 quarterbacks have had a higher rating over their first 4 seasons. QBR, the career passer rating for Dak is 97. The only other players in the history of the NFL first 4 years who had a higher rating, Kurt Warner and Russell Wilson Jr. III.
My thought on college is that you have to look at it different than the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL. I'm very confident, and I wrote this 3 weeks ago. If there is no college, there will be no college sports. And I had a lot of, Bob Bowlesby told me that. People, athletic directors all around the country have kind of said that.
So no classes, no sports.
Correct.
Okay.
If you can't bring students back to campus, you can't have a football team go play.
Unless you stop calling them student athletes and you just call them athletes, athletic
correct.
students.
And that would just be a whole thing. So I don't know how college football could thread the needle of, well, it's safe for students to come to campus, it's safe for athletes to come to campus, but it's not safe to have visitors in a stadium. That I think the percentage chance for college football with no fans is very low. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it's much more realistic. You have NBA games in Vegas or on a cruise ship or whatever they're talking about, or even the NFL. Dan Wetzel wrote this 2 weeks ago. Would be the hardest one to do all this because you got to, you can throw the NBA and the NHL in a metaphorical Dakota. It's hard to do that with the NFL. It's just such a big looming operation to move 32 teams to one place. It would just be a logistical nightmare. So, but for college football, I'd be stunned if we had games without fans. You take a look at the Floridas, the Ohio States, your big programs. You're talking about $50 million in ticket revenue alone. So it's a huge, and certainly the TV revenue is as much for those, for the Big Tens and the SECs. It's in that $40 million neighborhood. But I have a hard time imagining that from a liability standpoint because you're going to have the complicating part with college too, and we're seeing this with Governor Newsom and maybe his projections not being as optimistic as President Trump's projections. In college, like there's municipalities, there's mayors, there's college presidents. If there's one thing about college athletics, it's from a leadership perspective, it's very fraught.
Yes.
And it's very different.
He's Richard Roper, Chicago Sun-Times columnist, movie critic. He was given the early access to The Last Dance, the 10-part ESPN docuseries about the 1990 Bulls. That premieres this Sunday. So is this the Bulls documentary or the Michael Jordan documentary, Richard?
Well, Dan, you were there at the time, and that was always the question. Are we talking about the Chicago Bulls in the 1990s or Michael Jordan? He dominates the documentary the same way he dominated every conversation about the Bulls in the 1990s. Every interview, even when they're talking to Steve Kerr or Dennis Rodman or Barkley or anybody else, they're usually talking about Jordan. So he's definitely the focal point of this interview. And as you well know, Michael's not always been the most candid and forthcoming and, honest guy when it comes to interviews. He always kept it kind of a close guard. So it's really refreshing to see him open up on so many levels in this documentary.
Did they need to do 10 parts? Does it feel like it's stretched out just to stretch it out for 10 parts?
If it were only about the Bulls on court, I'd say, okay, even a team that won 6 NBA titles doesn't need 10 hours. But when you look at the off-court soap opera that went on through the 90s, from Michael's gambling problems to the tragic murder of his father, to Jerry Krause saying organizations win championships, not only players, to the Dennis Rodman circus, to Michael retiring in the middle of his peak to play baseball, there's so much material there, Dan. I mean, it actually doesn't feel like it's stretched out at all.
How deep do they go into Jordan's gambling?
It's not a huge part of the documentary. They do talk about it. The infamous interview where he did himself no favors with Ahmad Rashad when he kept his sunglasses on and said, "I don't have a gambling problem. I have a competition problem." They don't shy away from it, but they don't spend a whole episode on it either.
Is there one of those oh my gosh moments in this documentary?
I don't know if there's an oh my gosh moment. It's not as if we're learning a ton of stuff that the hardcore sports fan didn't know before. To me, the most interesting thing, Dan, is to see these guys in present day. Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas, Larry Bird, still having that competitiveness. And some of the favorite moments for me for the documentary is when the filmmakers, they'll hand Jordan a tablet where he can see an interview with someone that was done for the documentary. So they play him, Isaiah Thomas, trying to rationalize why the Pistons didn't shake hands with the Bulls after the 1991 NBA Eastern Conference Finals. And Jordan looks at it and shakes his head, and then in kind of an expletive-laden way calls Isaiah quite a few names and says he's not buying any of this guy's crap.
I saw where Bill Laimbeer was on ESPN, I think, yesterday, and he said LeBron is the greatest basketball player of all time, not Michael Jordan. Yeah. So these guys are taking this to their graves, that competition, that doesn't dissipate. Maybe it gets put on a back burner, but it's always going to be there. And I can imagine Mike holds grudges. Mike invented grudges. He created grudges, and you go,
oh my God.
Right?
Yeah. He constantly they talk about that quite a bit, as you know. He had to find a reason to get fired up for games. So, if Jerry Krause at one point said he really liked Dan Marley, then the next time Marley guarded Jordan was going to hit 50 points against him. Any little perceived slight. And he actually says, the famous kind of, fist pumping, waving thing he did after hitting the shot against the Cavaliers. He said that was directly aimed at the Chicago beat writers, all of whom had predicted the Cavaliers would win the series. And he says again in this, you're right, this is a guy now in his 50s, and he goes, bleep you bleepers, you didn't believe in us. That was for you.
Jordan had a kind of preemptive quote here before this is released this weekend, saying, I come off as maybe not a good guy in this. I'm paraphrasing, basically saying, I pick on teammates. In fact, Steve Kerr's on with this next hour, and we know what happened with do they address the punch when he punched Steve Kerr in practice?
Yes, in great detail. And the fact that he would pick on, you might remember this, he famously would call Will Purdue Will Vanderbilt because he said he wasn't tough enough to be named after a Big Ten team. But he would, he was just, let's face it, the guy was pretty good. He was kind of the Don Rickles of practice. But as you know, Dan, the Bulls' practices were, famously intense. And he would pick on somebody like a Scotty Burrell, who came out of college as a top-rate player, but was a super nice guy. And Michael would just pick on him. And you see guys like Burrell and Judd Butler and a lot of kind of secondary players saying, no, he wasn't a good guy at all. He was not nice at all. But Jordan says, I never asked anybody else to do what I wouldn't do when it comes to working out, staying on the court, playing tougher. So he made everybody around him better.
We're talking to Richard Roper, the great movie critic, columnist, Chicago Sun-Times. Rodman, more interesting on the court or off the court, considering he was married to Carmen Electra, he dated Madonna, everything else that went along with Rodman.
Yeah, I remember being on the sidelines of a game one day talking to a bunch of beat writers, and they're like, "What is this nonsense? Is he really dating Madonna?" I'm like, "She's right behind you right now. She's come to Chicago for the games." The antics. To me, one of the most fascinating things is at one point in their final run in the 97-98 season, Rodman said he just wasn't motivated. He needed a vacation, and Phil and Michael unilaterally decided, let him have 48 hours of Vegas. He went to Vegas on a vacation, and Carmen Electra is in this documentary as well. She goes, I didn't know he had a game that weekend. I'm not a basketball fan. Can you imagine now in this day and age a player and a coach saying, yeah, take 48 hours off? And Jerry Reinsdorf said, I didn't know about it either until I saw them in the news that he was in Vegas.
Two stories and I have a lot of stories, some that I can't tell, but some that have to do with the Bulls. But one was Rodman had a birthday party at a place called the Crowbar. And I remember going in, and it was the second floor, and he had it all to himself. And he always thought I was Craig Sager. Forever, he'd say, hey, what's up, Sager? And I go, hey, Dad, I just got to the point I answered for Craig Sager. If you went to the bar to get a beer, the bar was full of kamikazes. So there's no place for anything else other than if you went to the bar, you had to do a shot. And then Dennis would do a shot. And he had a Chicago police uniform or shirt on. And I remember I left at 4 a.m. He had a game the next night. So Rodman was there when I left the Crowbar. I get to practice. They have a shoot around at like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. I see Judd Bushler and Steve Kerr, and they go, here you ran into Dennis last night. I go, is he here? And he goes, oh, yeah. And he's down at the other end running around like a madman. And I think he had 18 rebounds that night in the game. And the other one was, I'm at a game against Seattle in the NBA Finals, and I'm covering Seattle's huddle for ESPN Radio. And I see the conversation that they were having with, like they were arguing in the huddle. Jordan was yelling and everybody was yelling, and Phil just was standing there. And Phil finally goes, and he said something like shut up or whatever. And then everybody stopped. And then he basically said, shut up so Michael can tell you what we're going to do. And I was just like, oh, my God. The other time, Dennis was playing in a game. Ball goes out of bounds. Prince is in the front row. And he goes over and he starts to talk to Prince. And Prince doesn't acknowledge him. And Prince's bodyguard says, you have to talk to me. And then I tell Prince what you're saying. So Dennis is talking to his bodyguard, who then turns to Prince, because Dennis wants to know if Prince wants to go out after the game, I was told. Like, there are just so many things that happen with those. And when's the last time you remember a team that everybody loved, unless they were facing your team? These guys were true. Like Golden State, we turned against Golden State after a while. The Patriots, you turn against. All these teams, you just go, oh, I love them or hate them. The Bulls had a fascination that didn't turn other people off, which is amazing.
No, you're absolutely right. Remember when Jordan came back and went to Madison Square Garden, and there were signs on Broadway in New York welcoming Jordan back. And there's a great, segment in the documentary where the Bulls went to Paris, one summer, and the French media were going. It was insane. And Michael wears a beret. That's his way of acknowledging that he's in Paris. So it really was. And I know the younger folks are sort of like, oh, there's not a lot of great teams like the Patriots. But Dan, what you're saying is true. The universal love and respect. And Magic Johnson gives a beautiful quote in the documentary where he's like, losing to the Bulls was still an honor, to Michael Jordan and the Bulls. That was a different level. You didn't feel bad. You held your head up high if you lost to the Chicago Bulls at that time.
And I still look back on the role that Jerry Krause played and, like, who was more responsible for the Bulls being great. And I don't know if it came down to Phil versus Jerry Krause or Michael versus Jerry Krause. But Jerry Krause, the GM, helped build the team, and he was going to disassemble it, take the wrecking ball to it. How did they address that? Why was it the last dance? Why didn't they stick around and try to make one more go of it?
Yeah, that's a central theme of the documentary, and I do agree with you. I think, Jerry Krause, and Steve can talk about this, Steve Kerr, but he was his own worst enemy. But I think he is unfairly maligned for, a few comments, because when you look at what he did building those teams, people forget Pippen was actually drafted by Seattle, but the Bulls had orchestrated this trade for him. He found Horace Grant. He always found the perfect guys. Jordan and Pippen were the only two guys who were on all six of those teams. He always found a guy. Okay, we need a veteran. We're going to get Bill Cartwright. We lost Horace Grant to the Magic. We're going to bring in a rebounder and Dennis Rodman. We don't have Paxson anymore. We got Steve Kerr. He always figured out a way to put the perfect pieces in place. He's also the guy that recommended to Reinsdorf that they bring in this guy named Phil Jackson, who was in the outer edges of organized basketball, and they brought him in as an assistant, and then eventually, he became, the head coach. So, Krause, unfortunately, is not remembered well, and he said the wrong things, and he did. He wanted to dismantle that team probably a year early. To tell Phil Jackson before his final year, even if you go 82-0, you're not coming back, that's insanity.
Because it couldn't have been monetary reasons, could it? Because Mike was making about $30 million a year, but for so many years, Mike was the fourth, fifth, or sixth highest paid player on his own team. He made so much money from Nike, but I didn't understand. Was it ego to say, hey, I can do this with another team and another coach, or was it money?
It was definitely ego. It wasn't about money. It was definitely about ego, about why are these, it happens in our business sometimes too, where a program director doesn't understand why the host is getting all the attention when he built the radio station. And Jerry Jen's laughing. He doesn't know what I'm talking about there. That's never happened. But, I think, unfortunately, Jerry just, he didn't get any credit, he wanted that. And you're absolutely right, Dan. He wanted to, get rid of Phil Jackson, say goodbye to Michael, and start all over again with Tim Floyd, and rebuild the dynasty. And we all know how that didn't work out.
Great stuff, Richard. As always, thanks for joining us. We look forward to watching it.
Thanks, Dan.
That's Richard Roper. Steve, would you rather be you or have the career of Vince Carter and Allen Iverson? Or Allen Iverson?
Are you being serious?
Yeah. We were just wondering that, career.
Yeah, I think I'd rather be Vince Carter or Allen Iverson. Do you know how hard it was to be me out there on the floor trying to swim upstream every night playing against these guys? It would have been way more fun to be those guys.
Yeah, but you won titles, and then you've coached and won titles.
Well, I didn't know you were throwing the coaching part in.
Oh, yeah. You're the coach. Yeah, the whole package. You get to be. So would you rather be you, player and coach, or Vince or Allen Iverson?
Oh, I'm very happy with
Okay, good. That's the right answer.
Yeah.
That's the right answer. Mike talks about that he wasn't a great teammate, but he did things to motivate players, where he picked on Scotty Burrell. I guess he was really rough on Scotty Burrell in practice.
Yeah, he was.
Was he rough on you?
He was. He was. I think he was. He tested me. I think he tested everybody, and I think that what you have to do is you have to stand up to him, and not necessarily physically, which I think basically he talked trash to me and I talked trash back, which wasn't highly advised at the time, but it was. I knew I had to stand up for myself, and I think that. Looking back, and even at the time, I could see what he was doing. Michael wanted to make sure everybody who was out there could deal with the pressure of a playoff game. And if you couldn't deal with his trash talk during practice, then he didn't think you were going to stand up to the pressure during a playoff game. And it made sense. I mean, he brought the level of practice up to such a high level that it made us better as a team. And those are the days when we actually scrimmaged every day. And, we've gotten smarter these days. We don't practice as often, which saves the players' bodies more. But back then we had more competition, which may have honed our edge a little bit more too. So that was more the case back then. And Michael took advantage of that for sure. And it paid off, I think, for our team.
Do you shoot hoops at practice?
I shoot free throws. Sometimes I'll shoot against Steph, just to have a little fun competition. And I can barely move anymore, though. I can't shoot jumpers anymore. My thing hurts, so I just shoot free throws.
But you guys do something different. That if you touch the rim, that's a miss, isn't it?
It's I think what we do is if you make it, but you touch the rim, it's 1. But if you swish, it's 2. And if you miss, it's -1. That's what we play.
Does Clay get involved in this, or is it just you and Steph?
No, I've only played with Steph, and he just whenever he needs to, he just swishes. So it's just incredible. It really is. I rarely miss. I mean, it's when you shooting a free throw is that stays with you for sure. So I rarely miss, but he can swish when he needs to. I can't really do that well.
But you still have the best 3-point percentage of all time. Does that ever does that come up in conversation with, when they say, "Oh, Steph's the greatest shooter of all time," then you go, "But who has a higher 3-point percentage?"
I try not to go down that path. The degree of difficulty on the shot stand was quite different. I think I don't think I can win that argument.
Fritzy, what did you learn on today's program?
I learned that you found the Eli Manning Super Bowl MVP announcement card you read on the podium while cleaning out the attic and were trying to get it to Eli.
Well, I want to give it to the people who are auctioning off his Corvette that he won that night when I handed out the Super Bowl trophy and the keys to that Corvette. But I'm giving you the actual card that I got on the podium that night, and his name is written in there with a Sharpie. And I don't think I wrote it in. I think somebody wrote it in from the NFL and then handed it to me. McLovin, what did you learn on today's award-winning program?
We learned why Dak Prescott had a buffet at his controversial dinner because of one of the guests.
Wow.
I don't know if that's the case.
Wow.
I don't know if it's
so mean.
That's actually what I said. Seton O'Connor, what did you learn on today's program?
I learned Steve Kerr said swimming upstream every night wasn't very easy.
With his playing ability?
His playing ability also in the NBA. Yeah. Swimming upstream.
Upstream. Call him Salmon. Paulie, what'd you learn?
Andy Dalton's got 2 new receivers, and they're 3.5 feet tall.
It's two boys. Todd, what did I learn on today's program?
Looks like the Browns may be going very old school with their new jerseys. The Brian Sipe, Mike Pruitt's cardiac kids days.
No, Greg Pruitt.
Greg Pruitt. Well, he had a brother Mike, too.
No matter what happens, you want to make sure your loved ones are taken care of. That's why LegalZoom has made it easy to set up the right estate plan without leaving your home. Take care of your family today with the right estate plan at LegalZoom.com. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for allowing us to be part of your lives. And we'll be back tomorrow. Dan Patrick Show.